It was a cold, stormy night when Alice sat alone in her old house, staring at the dancing shadows on the walls. The wind howled through the trees outside, and the rain slammed against the windows with a rhythmic, almost comforting sound. Yet, there was something unsettling in the air, something that had been there for weeks, slowly creeping in, filling the house with a sense of unease. The house itself felt like it was alive. The floors creaked, the walls groaned, and the doorways seemed to shift. Alice had lived here her whole life, and yet for the past few nights, she felt an overwhelming sense that something was off. Something was watching her. She shook the thought from her mind and went back to reading her book. But the feeling wouldn't leave. It was as though the house had become more than just a home. It had become a trap. The shadows in the corner seemed to move, just out of the corner of her eye. She tried to convince herself that it was the storm playing tricks on her mind. But as she glanced up for her book, she noticed something strange. The lights flickered, and a cold chill swept through the room. Alice stood up, walking over the window to check the storm. The wind howled louder now, shaking the trees in the yard. She closed the curtains, feeling the temperature in the room dropped even further. Then she heard it, a faint sound like footsteps coming from upstairs. Alice froze, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. She had been alone in the house all evening. She was sure of it. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, echoing through the quiet house. "Hello?" she called out, her voice quavering. "Is someone there?" But there was no answer, only the storm outside and the eerie creaking of the house. Alice slowly made her way to the staircase, each step making the floorboards groan beneath her. The sound from upstairs grew louder as she reached the bottom of the stairs. Her breath caught in her throat. The house was silent once again, except for the wind. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should call someone. But her curiosity got the better of her. What was that sound? Who could it be? She climbed the stairs cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible, her heart pounding in her ears. The hallway upstairs was dark, the only light coming from the dim moonlight filtering through the windows. As she moved down the hall, she felt a sudden chill, a draft, but she didn't see anything. No one was there, but then she heard it again, the soft, deliberate footsteps. Alice's pulse raced. The footsteps were coming closer now, echoing the hallway behind her. She whipped around, expecting to see someone, but the hallway was empty. Her breath was shallow, her chest tight with fear. She could feel the presence of someone standing just out of sight. "Who's there?" she asked again, her voice barely a whisper. And then, to her horror, the footsteps stopped. The house went dead silent. Alice's hand trembled as she reached for the light switch, but before she could flick it on, the door at the end of the hallway creaked open. Just a crack, the figure in the doorway was tall, dark, and seemed to melt into the shadows. Its outline was blurry, almost as if it were part of the darkness itself. Alice could barely breathe. She stepped back, unable to look away from the doorway. The figure didn't move, but Alice felt its gaze fixed upon her. Her body felt frozen, as if she were rooted to the spot. Her heart raced, and her throat tightened. "Who are you?" she whispered, but the words barely left her mouth. The figure didn't answer. It simply stepped forward into the hallway, slowly and deliberately, as if it knew Alice wouldn't dare move. Her legs trembled, her mind racing, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from it. The figure approached her, moving unnaturally fast, and Alice tried to back away. but the hallways seemed to stretch, the walls closing in around her. She reached for the nearest door to escape, but the door slammed shut in front of her, trapping her in the hallway. The figure was now right in front of her, too close for comfort. She could feel its icy breeze on her skin, could hear its slow, steady breathing, and then it spoke. Its voice was low, guttural, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I've been waiting for you." Elsa's blood ran cold. In that instant, she understood. The thing in front of her was no ordinary visitor. It was something far worse, something that had been following her, waiting for the right moment to strike. She was no longer safe in her home. Suddenly, the figure moved again, its hand outstretched, but this time Alice was ready. In a desperate act of survival, she turned and ran down the stairs, never once looking back. She slammed into the front door, desperately trying to open it, but it was locked. The wind outside had become a roar, and the rain pounded against the windows as though it were trying to break in. Alice pulled at the door with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. She could hear the footsteps behind her, getting closer, the shadow of the figure following her every move. Just as the figure reached her, the door suddenly swung open. Alice stumbled outside, into the storm, her heart racing. She didn't dare look back. As she ran through the rain-soaked yard, she heard the door slam shut behind her. But it wasn't just a wind. There was something else. A faint whisper, like a voice calling her name, echoing in the wind. And she knew, deep down, that whatever had been waiting for her was still out there, still watching.